He was a German shepherd deemed a failure, his spirit too gentle. His compassion was viewed as a flaw, a grave mistake. He was never destined to be a hero. But in a quiet backyard, under a blazing, indifferent sun, a 7-year-old boy was bound to a steel pole, left to a grim fate. His stepmother, shielded in protective gear, was orchestrating a vicious swarm of wasps to descend on him. Nobody recognized his supposed weakness as the only answer. No one ever thought he would break his conditioning. But he recognized the scent of terror. He understood the sacred duty to protect. What happened next will break your heart and make you believe in second chances, especially for those the world has already labeled as broken. Before we start, tell me where you're watching from. Leave your country in the comments below. And if you believe compassion is truly a strength and not a weakness, hit that subscribe button, because this particular story, it might just restore your faith in miracles. The high-altitude sun over Arvada, Colorado, was a relentless pale eye. It was only 3 o'clock in the afternoon, yet a Tuesday heatwave was baking the suburban streets of Juniper Circle, causing the asphalt to shimmer and the perfectly watered lawns to appear parched. Officer Kalen Riley felt the sweat gathering beneath his heavy vest, a familiar and unwelcome sticky irritation. The patrol was agonizingly dull, far too quiet. Kyle despised quiet days. They left him with too much time inside his own head, a place he couldn't afford to be. His fingers drummed a restless rhythm on the steering wheel of his K9 unit, the air conditioning, waging a losing battle against the oppressive heat. Kyle, known to everyone on the force as simply Kyle, was a man forged in the image of the foothills he roamed, solid, rugged, and clearly weathered by relentless pressure. At 42, his dark hair was cut shorter than regulation, a silent rebellion against the premature silver already claiming his temples. His eyes, a profound and weary blue, had witnessed far too much domestic sorrow and bureaucratic foolishness. Those eyes seldom smiled, even when his lips formed a tight, thin line of courtesy. By all measures, he was a good cop, a canine handler by his own choice, but the job itself was grinding him down. He believed in the badge, yet the system was severely testing his faith. He glanced at the mobile data terminal mounted next to him. Nothing. Only an endless, sun-soaked silence. From the back, his partner released a low, drowsy sigh that finished with a soft huff. Kyle's eyes flickered to the rearview mirror, his gaze softening for just a moment. Odin. The dog was magnificent, a physically imposing specimen of a German shepherd. At 4 years old, he was 90 solid pounds of sleek, muscle-rich black and tan fur, and an intimidating, piercing intelligence. His ears stood perpetually alert, angled forward, his gaze sharp and missing absolutely nothing. According to his file, Odin was the perfect K9. He could follow a scent across miles of concrete or detect contraband concealed within solid steel. In reality, he was a problem. Kyle was under immense pressure, and Odin was the direct cause. The dog was simply quirky. That was the diplomatic term Kyle used with civilians. Flawed was the word his superior, Captain Alvarez, used, and that word now hung over Kyle's career like a guillotine. He felt that familiar knot tighten in his gut, a chilling dread that the afternoon sun could not warm. Last week's performance evaluation had been an absolute disaster. The setup was a standard training exercise. A rookie playing a suspect was acting hostile, yelling and concealing contraband. Kyle issued the same command he had given 100 times before. Go. Odin exploded forward, a blur of fur and fury, his barks echoing with disciplined menace. Yet the rookie, green and shaking, recoiled. He threw an arm over his face, a genuine sob of terror escaping his lips. And then Odin stopped. He dug in his paws, halting just inches from the target, the growl fading in his chest as he tilted his head. A wave of deep confusion washed over his noble face. Then, to Kyle's disbelief, Odin took a slow step forward. He lowered his head and gently began to lick away the man's tears. The official report was brutal. K9 unit exhibits misplaced empathy, it declared. Failure to engage, failure to neutralize, Subject K9 is deemed unreliable for tactical operations. Kyle found himself standing in the office of Captain Alvarez, a man who viewed the world in stark black and white. A world of compliance or non-compliance. A former Marine, he believed discipline was the only cure for human weakness. He was built like a fire hydrant, a block of pure muscle, and no humor with a thick gray mustache that looked like it could deflect around. Kyle Alvarez had barked his voice like gravel scraping across cement. "I have respect for your service record. You are a good officer, but that dog of yours is broken. He's a liability, not an asset. You have 1 month to harden him, to make him attack, or he's off the force. 1 month?" Kyle caught Odin's reflection in the glass. The dog's giant head rested on his paws, the picture of innocence, his loyal brown eyes fixed on Kyle with a quiet, steady love. Retirement wasn't some golden parachute of chasing tennis balls. It meant Odin would be ripped away from him, branded a failure, and cast aside into a civilian world he was never meant for. Kyle would not let that happen. Odin was more than just his partner. In the quiet of his lonely apartment, Odin was the last piece of family Kyle had. But how can you teach a soul to unlearn compassion? The radio crackled to life, a welcome burst of static pulling Kyle from his downward spiral. Unit 7K9 respond to a non-urgent welfare check. 1422 Juniper Circle. Repeat 1422. Kyle keyed the mic, the plastic warm against his palm. 7K9 responding. Dispatch, what's the nature of the call? The dispatcher, a woman named Sarah, replied. Her voice was an island of calm, almost musical, a strange disembodied comfort in the chaos of his world. Sarah, a divorced mom of 2, had been a dispatcher for 15 years longer than Kyle had worn a badge. She was a delicate, almost bird-like woman who ran on coffee and nervous energy with kind eyes that seemed to take in everything whenever he saw her at the station. But she never missed a single detail. The caller is a Mrs. Henderson at 1418, Sarah's voice clarified. She reports a dog barking non-stop for over an hour. At 1422 says it's unusual for the house. She also mentioned, and this is where it gets weird, a loud buzzing noise like machinery, or maybe bees? She's elderly, and while Kyle figured she could be confused, she sounded insistent. No one's answering their door. Kyle sighed. 10-4 Sarah, a barking dog and bees. Just another Tuesday on the job. He hit the cruiser's light bar, leaving the siren off, and pulled out into the street. Juniper Circle was in Arvada's wealthiest neighborhood. Huge homes, perfect lawns, 0 crime rate. This felt like a complete waste of time. Probably just a landscaper with a leaf blower and a nosy neighbor. He steered the cruiser down the quiet, tree-lined street. 1422 was an immaculate 2-story modern house. It was all sharp lines, walls of glass, and expensive gray stone. The lawn was an unnaturally perfect shade of green. The driveway was bare. The whole property felt sterile, lifeless. And from inside the patrol car, there was only silence, no barking. Nothing to see, he whispered, killing the engine. A heavy, oppressive silence immediately fell. He was just about to key his mic to report the call as groundless when a sudden movement in the back seized his attention. It wasn't a bark. It wasn't a growl. It was a low, guttural whine Kyle had never in his life heard from Odin. This was a sound that resonated with sheer absolute panic. Odin, what is it, buddy? Kyle contorted his body to see into the cage. Odin was already standing alert. His hackles formed a rigid line from his neck all the way down to his tail. But his gaze wasn't on the house. He was staring laser-focused at the high wooden privacy fence dividing the front yard from the back. Then Odin's behavior turned strange in a way Kyle had never witnessed. This wasn't aggression. It was terror. He began to scratch. He clawed frantically at the reinforced door, slamming his 90-pound frame against the window with a sickening, dull thud. The whine climbed into a desperate, high-pitched shriek that tore through the silence. Easy, easy, boy, Kyle shouted. His own instincts were screaming a warning. This wasn't some empathetic response. This was Odin's signal for something gone horribly wrong. The realization sent a chill straight to Kyle's bones. He flung his door open, the entire cruiser rocking from Odin's thrashing. His heart suddenly hammered against his tactical vest, a heavy drumbeat against the sweltering afternoon heat. He quickly hit the release for the K9 door. Odin launched from the vehicle like a missile, a blur of black and tan. He completely ignored his training, bypassing the front door. He completely ignored the house, sprinting directly for the high wooden fence that guarded the backyard. He slammed his powerful body into the gate and began to bark, a frantic, almost hysterical sound. It was a bark full of desperation Kyle had only heard during live-fire training exercises. "Odin, heel!" Kyle commanded, his voice sharp. His partner ignored him, tearing at the wood, sending splinters flying. Kyle raced to the gate and seized the latch. It was unlocked. The moment he pushed it open, the sound washed over him. Sarah's dispatch notes had been wrong. The neighbor hadn't heard a dog barking. That was Odin barking now. What the neighbor heard was something else entirely. A loud, angry, incessant buzzing sound. A vibrating hum that filled the very air, rattling his teeth in their sockets. Not machinery. It was insects. Thousands upon thousands of them. The unmistakable sound of a swarm. Kyle drew his weapon, training overriding the adrenaline spike, flooding his veins. "This is 7K9. He spoke into his shoulder mic, his voice strained. "I'm on scene at Juniper. I have a situation. Possible?" He trailed off. He forced the gate fully open. Over the frantic barking of his partner and under the deafening, furious buzzing of the swarm, he heard it. A faint, thin sound, almost inhuman. It was a noise choked by pain, a weak and absolutely terrified whimper. The sound of a child. Kyle threw his entire weight against the wooden gate. The already weakened latch gave way. It shattered with a sharp crack of splintering wood, the gate swinging violently and crashing against the house's stucco siding. Odin burst through first. A 90-pound blur of controlled fury, his barks directed not at a person, but at the scene in the manicured yard's center. Kyle followed, rounding the corner with his weapon drawn, his mind prepared for a threat, a burglar, a fight, a domestic dispute. But what he saw made his heart stop cold. The buzzing was a physical, angry wall of sound. Before him, bathed in the harsh, indifferent light of the Colorado sun, was a pristine patio, a wrought iron table perfectly set for tea. In the patio's center, anchored in concrete, stood a spinning metal clothesline pole. Its arms reached out like a terrible shining crucifix. Bound to its central mast was a child. His name was Leo. Kyle's brain processed the horror in fractured snapshots. 7 years old, maybe 8 small for his age. He was fully dressed in blue jeans and a faded red t-shirt. His arms were cruelly yanked high above his head, his wrists bound fast to the metal pole with white nylon rope, the same kind used for boating. His small sneakers dangled a foot from the ground, kicking in a frantic, desperate rhythm. He was covered, consumed by a living, shifting mass of black insects. Kyle's mind screamed bees, but his training corrected the ID. Paper wasps, larger and more aggressive. Their segmented bodies pulsed with venom. They swarmed over his jeans, his shirt, and most horribly across his face and neck as Kyle watched. He was frozen for one sickening second as wasps crawled into his t-shirt's collar and under the cuffs of his jeans, disappearing within his clothes. The boy's body wasn't just struggling. It was convulsing in a constant, violent torment. A violent shudder as he was relentlessly stung dozens, perhaps hundreds of times. The exposed skin on his face and hands wasn't skin anymore. It was a grotesque, swollen mass of red and purple, his eyes puffed completely shut. Kyle's gaze snapped from the child scanning the corner of the yard, searching for the threat, for the reason why. And then he found it. Standing by the eaves of the house, half hidden in the shade of a plum tree, was a figure. It was tall and slender, encased from head to toe in a pristine white professional beekeeper's suit. The veiled helmet and thick gloves rendered the person alien inhuman, like an astronaut observing some hostile, distant world. The figure stood with a chilling and casual stillness, holding a long silver aluminum pole the kind used for cleaning gutters or pools. As Kyle watched, the figure calmly lifted the pole, its path leading to the eaves, and a massive football-sized gray paper nest teeming with wasps. The figure jammed the pole straight into the nest's heart. A fresh, furious cloud of defenders erupted, making a beeline for the only available unprotected target in the entire yard. The child, Odin, was going berserk, barking and lunging at the figure in white. But the dog's survival instincts held him back from charging into the dense swarm around the pole. "Police, drop the pole. Drop it now!" Kyle roared, his voice cracking under the strain, leveling his Glock 19 at the white suit's center mass. The figure stopped prodding the nest. It turned, its movements slow, unhurried, almost dismissive. The black mesh of the veil stared back at him, like an empty void. He could see it was a woman inside her silhouette, visible against the bright fabric. She tilted her head with a hint of mild curiosity, as if he were just a lost mailman who had stumbled into the wrong yard. The sound of his shout seemed to cut through the boy's agony. Leo, who Kyle saw, was barely conscious, summoned his final reserve of strength to lift his chin. Though his eyes were swollen shut, he turned his head toward Kyle's voice, his lips already purple and cracked parted. A dry, rasping sound, barely a whisper, was torn from his raw throat. "Save me!" It was the most horrific sound Kyle had ever heard, a plea that shattered his paralysis. He took one desperate step forward, ready to face the stings, to do anything. "Stay back, officer." The voice from the helmet was a razor's edge, sharp, clear, and terrifyingly devoid of all emotion. It was muffled, filtered through the mask, but undeniably female. It wasn't a shout. It was a command that froze Kyle solid. The woman then pointed the pole, not at him, but with a cold gesture toward the suffering child. "This does not concern you. This is a private family matter. He is being disciplined." The words refused to make sense in Kyle's mind. He stared dumbfounded, his weapon still raised. "Disciplined," he repeated, his voice choked with raw disbelief. "For what? What in God's name could a child do to deserve this?" The woman in the white suit actually shrugged. That casual, indifferent movement was the most obscene thing Kyle had ever witnessed. She lowered the pole slightly. He stole a cookie, a single chocolate chip cookie from the pantry before finishing his lunch. He knows the rules. He must learn actions have consequences. He has to learn respect. "Now please get off my property. Leave my property." The words filtered through mesh, and pure madness hung in the air, thick and impossible. Kyle's training for shootouts and traffic stops tried to file this scene away. It failed. This wasn't a crime. It was a medieval execution. The buzzing of the wasps was a physical pressure against his ears, while Leo's high strangled whimpers, now constant, were a knife twisting in his chest. Morgan, the woman in white, proved her indifference. She calmly lifted the long aluminum pole again, her movements economical and practiced, and shoved it deep into the weeping gray nest. A fresh, thick, furious black storm of wasps erupted from the hole, a living wave of airborne reinforcements. They descended instantly on the one helpless signature of heat and breath. Leo's body went rigid, a silent, agonizing arch of his back. His mouth opened in a scream that was now completely silent. Kyle's tactical mind finally rebooted, running 1,000 scenarios in a single panicked second. He had his firearm, the Glock 19, its weight familiar in his sweating palm. He had Odin, his partner, barking and straining beside him. Before him, a dying child. His gut instinct screamed, neutralized the threat. His grip tightened on the pistol sights, locking on the center mass of the white suit. "Drop the pole. Final warning." He yelled. Morgan simply tilted her head as if he were just a barking dog himself, an annoyance, not a threat. She gave the nest another deliberate, vicious jab. Kyle's finger squeezed the trigger, but he froze. The tactical choice was an absolute nightmare. Option 1, shoot. The suit was bulky, padded. A shot to the torso might not penetrate. A headshot was incredibly high risk. And even if he succeeded, if he dropped her, what then? It wouldn't stop the wasps. The swarm, already in a frenzy, would continue its assault. Shooting her would not save the boy. Option 2, rush the boy. He could try. He could holster his weapon, run through the swarm, and try to tear at the ropes. But the nylon was thick, the knots impossibly tight. He'd be covered in seconds, stung, incapacitated. He and the boy would perish together at the foot of that cold metal pole. He was helpless, his gun useless. His training was useless. All he had left was his broken partner. "Odin!" Kyle's voice was a desperate, ragged cry, less a command than a prayer. He gambled on the dog's ingrained training to cut through this chaos. Seize fast. The order was absolute. Seize meant to engage and neutralize the main threat, but Odin, his senses flooded by the deafening buzz, the scent of venom and the child's piercing screams, looked back at Kyle. He saw the weapon aimed. He felt his handler's terror. He glanced at the figure in white, Morgan calm-shielded and carrying the faint scent of plastic and cloth. Then his eyes locked on the small one, Leo, thrashing violently, radiating an aura of pure, unfiltered terror, and more critically, the chemical signature of life fading. Kyle was pointing at Morgan. The command was meant for her. Odin surged forward, his bark a deep, chest-ripping roar of aggression. He launched across the patio, but not toward the figure in white. He ignored the direction of the gun. He followed his own nature. In that instant, Odin's so-called flawed empathy, the very trait that marked him a failure in training, made its own tactical assessment. The suspect who cried during training was just a man. This was a pup. This was a small, fading life being extinguished. And Odin's unique compassion could not see it as anything other than a life that had to be saved. He blew past the astonished Morgan without a glance. Kyle watched horrified. "Odin, no!" he screamed, thinking his dog was disoriented, charging the boy. But Odin wasn't attacking. He launched himself. With a power that defied his 90-pound frame, Odin propelled his body upward, his paws striking the metal pole above the child's head. He twisted mid-flight, not to bite, not to seize, but to cover. He slammed his own body into the boy's, pressing his dense fur and muscled torso over Leo's head and chest, transforming into a living, breathing shield. The swarm, disoriented for a second, now had a new, warmer, fur-covered target. They descended upon Odin. The dog's deep, aggressive bark instantly twisted into a high-pitched, agonizing howl. It was a sound of pure, unfiltered agony. Kyle saw the dog flinch a sharp, piercing yelp as the first stinger struck his soft, dark nose. Another struck his ear. Dozens more burrowed deep into his thick coat, finding the vulnerable skin of his belly and inner legs. Odin's whole body convulsed violently, his legs shaking as the venom flooded his system. But he held his ground. He howled a ceaseless, heartbreaking cry and pressed himself even tighter against the boy, shielding Leo's face with his own, whining in pure agony, but refusing to give way. Odin's sacrifice, his howl of torment, shattered Kyle's tactical paralysis. It bought him precisely 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, Kyle's frantic eyes swept across the yard, past the fading boy, past his suffering partner, past the deranged woman, and saw it coiled on a plastic reel next to the house, a green garden hose. He holstered his weapon in one fluid, practiced movement. He didn't run to the child. He didn't run to his dog. He sprinted for the spigot. He tore the hose from its reel, his fingers fumbling for the nozzle, his thumb desperately seeking the plastic lever. He wrenched the brass spigot open. The shriek of metal was devoured by the buzzing. Water erupted from the nozzle. He aimed high, his first target the nest. The high-pressure stream blasted the gray, papery home with the force of a fire hose. The nest disintegrated, dissolving into a wet gray pulp. The wasps, thousands of them, scattered and reeling their assault, broken, their hive destroyed by the sudden violent deluge. His gaze then locked onto the woman sweeping the powerful current to strike her shielded face. The water's sheer impact threw her head back, shattering her stance as she stumbled, dropping the pole with a clatter. Vision-stolen senses scrambled now, just a soaked, sputtering figure. His most crucial targets were his partners. "Hold on, boy!" Kel yelled, aiming the spray directly at Odin and Leo, drenching them in the cold, shocking water. This was no gentle rescue. It was a desperate flood meant to purge the venomous swarm. The wasps fell from the dog and the boy, their wings too wet to fly, their fury vanquished by the tide. Kyle let the hose fall, its water gushing over the patio, and finally raced toward his heroes, the gushing water a roaring backdrop of white noise as he tore his service knife from his belt. The nylon ropes, slick with venom and water, resisted the serrated blade's bite. Severing the bindings with two brutal upward strokes, Leo's small form, released from the pole, collapsed. Kyle caught him before he struck the concrete, a terrifyingly light, dead weight, his skin burning hot. He was unconscious. His breathing was a frantic, high-pitched whistle. Kyle knew that sound. Strider. His airway was closing. Kyle hit the quick release on his own vest. The heavy carrier, loaded with ceramic plates, just fell open. He tore it from his body and threw it down, grabbing the lighter empty carrier and wrapping the boy's limp form inside it. A makeshift shield. He didn't know if it was for warmth, for the deep shock, or a primal instinct to shield the child from a world that tried to murder him. He scooped him up, cradling him close, and hit his shoulder radio. Mike 7K9 to dispatch. I have the child. He is unresponsive. It's severe anaphylaxis. I need EMS at my location now. 1422 Juniper, tell them to fly Kyle. What is that screaming? Sarah's voice crackled, sharp with absolute panic. It took a moment to realize she meant Odin. His partner's agonizing howls had faded to a series of choked, hitching yelps. Kyle's head snapped around. Morgan the woman sat in a puddle near the ruins of the wasp nest, the deluge plastering the white suit to her frame. She'd removed the veiled helmet, revealing a woman Kyle never could have anticipated. She was no crone. She was perfectly preserved, perhaps 40 years old, with sharp aristocratic features and expensive blonde hair now plastered to her skull. Her makeup was flawless, waterproof. She wasn't crying. She wasn't in shock. She was surveying the carnage in her yard, the churning mud, the dead wasps, the obliterated nest with a look of profound, icy annoyance. Her eyes met Kyle's. "This is unauthorized," she said, her voice clipped, a cold, educated monotone. "You've ruined the lesson. He'll never learn respect if he isn't taught consequences." "This is all your fault." The world tilted around Kyle. The statement's casual cruelty was like a physical blow. He had no time for this. He stalked to her child in his arms, yanking the cuffs from his belt. He snapped one bracelet. He snarled, his voice a low, vibrating growl that barely sounded human. "You say one more word to me, I'll add obstruction of justice to the charges." She merely glared at him, her offense palpable, as if he'd just breached some sacred etiquette. He bolted for the cruiser, yanking open the rear door to the hard plastic prisoner bench, and carefully laid Leo's small, vest-clad body down. He raced back for his partner, Odin. The dog was on his side, his large frame already starting to swell at an alarming rate. His muzzle was so enlarged it was nearly unrecognizable. He trembled violently, legs twitching in small, involuntary fits. "Not you too, boy. Not you." KL's voice shattered. He scooped the 90-pound dog into his arms, the dead weight of his partner, a familiar, agonizing burden. He wrestled Odin into the front passenger seat, where the dog collapsed, his head hitting the dash with a soft, grim thud. KL glanced down the street. He could hear it now, a faint siren, a distant promise still miles away. Far too far. He looked at Leo in the back. The boy's breathing was a tiny, whistling gasp for air. He looked at Odin. The dog's tongue was turning blue. The ambulance was never going to make it. They weren't going to make it. The venom was spreading too fast. In that instant, KL made the decision. He was no longer a cop. He was a lifeline. He vaulted into the driver's seat, slamming the cruiser into drive and flooring the accelerator. The V8 engine roared to life, tires smoking as he launched the car straight over the curb, ignoring the driveway entirely. He hit the siren, the lights, the air horn, every warning system the vehicle possessed. 7K9, I am 1097 en route to Arvada General with both victims. Notify the ER. I have a child approximately 7 in respiratory distress and a K9 experiencing severe shock. Clear the route. KL, you are not authorized for that transport. Wait for EMS. Sarah's voice shot back, frantic. They're dying. Sarah, tell the ER I'm coming in hot, he roared, blasting through a 4-way stop at 80 miles an hour. Cars screeched and horns blared, swerving frantically from his path. The world blurred into a tunnel of flashing lights and the wail of his own siren. He risked a glance at the passenger seat. Odin, it was bad. His partner was in a full anaphylactic seizure, his body drawn completely rigid. His legs kicked a steady, grim rhythm against the glove box. A thick, ropey foam tinged with pink poured from his grotesquely swollen jaws. Hang on, boy, just hang on! KL yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. He forced his eyes to the rearview mirror. Leo, the small form on the back seat. He was watching the tiny rise and fall of the vest. Rise, fall, then stop. It just stopped. KL's blood ran cold. He had to have imagined it. He looked again. Nothing. No movement. Leo's chest was absolutely still. Respiratory arrest? Asterisk no asterisk? The word was a silent, primal scream in his soul. Asterisk not on my watch, not again. He was doing 100 miles an hour down Ralston Road. One hand was clamped on the steering wheel, the cruiser fishtailing. His other hand flew from the wheel, ripping open the Velcro flap of his trauma kit bolted to the transmission tunnel. He didn't even need to look. He knew it by pure feel. Past the tourniquet, past the combat gauze. His fingers finally closed around the hard plastic cylinder he was searching for. The EpiPen. The adult dose. 0.3 milligrams calibrated for a fully grown man, not a little boy. He didn't care. An overdose of adrenaline was better than no adrenaline at all. He kept his eyes locked on the road, the engine screaming. He flicked the blue safety cap off with his thumb. He twisted his torso in a violent, agonizing stretch, his right arm reaching blindly into the back. He felt for the small leg through the damp denim. There was no time to prep an injection site. He didn't care about the jeans. He just plunged it in. He drove the needle down with every ounce of his strength through the denim and deep into the boy's small thigh muscle. He jabbed the orange tip down, hearing the click. He screamed the numbers. 1, 2, 3. He yanked the pen free. His eyes darted from the road to the mirror in a panic. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Breathe, he screamed at the reflection, his free hand crashing against the dash. Breathe, damn you. Breathe. And then a sound. A single gasp. A violent, shuddering breath like a man clawing his way from beneath the waves. Leo's small frame convulsed, arching off the seat. His chest hitched and then life returned in a series of shallow, ragged yet real breaths. A sound escaped Cale he'd never known he could make a sob that ripped from his very soul. The red and white sign for Arvada General Hospital flashed into view. He didn't slow, but cranked the wheel, vaulting the curb, and sent the K9 cruiser tearing across the manicured lawn, finally coming to a smoking, screeching stop inside the ambulance bay. Just as the automatic ER doors hissed open, sliding apart before his cruiser had even settled from the violent stop. His siren's wail died in a choked gasp. He was out of the car in a flash, propelled by nothing but pure, raw adrenaline, ripping the back door open. The small form wrapped in the black vest lay there terrifyingly still and silent. But those faint, ragged breaths he'd heard after the injection were still there. He scooped Leo into his arms, a limp bundle of damp denim and feverish skin, and bolted through the entrance, his boots sliding on the sterile linoleum. The triage desk was just 20 feet ahead, a fortress of beige plastic. Behind it sat a woman who seemed to be carved from stone. This was Brenda, the ER's formidable lead triage nurse, a woman in her mid-50s with close-cropped gray hair and the weary, unshakable eyes of a person who had witnessed every form of human suffering and was impressed by none of it. Cale never broke his stride. He just roared, his voice raw with panic. Anaphylaxis multiple wasp stings, 7 years old, respiratory arrest for 1 minute, self-administered an EpiPen. 0.3. Brenda didn't flinch. She hit a red button on the console, her gaze never leaving him. Trauma 1 now PEDS anaphylaxis. The words echoed through the hall, and in a heartbeat, Cale was completely surrounded. A team in blue scrubs appeared. As if from nowhere, a gurney at the ready led by a young, intense doctor. This was Dr. R.S. Thorne, a resident fueled by caffeine and pure nervous energy, whose wire-rimmed glasses were in a constant state of fog. "We'll take him from here," a nurse said gently. But Cale's grip tightened. "He stopped breathing," he insisted as if they couldn't understand. Dr. Thorne met his eyes, his voice clipped and fast. "The EpiPen dose." 0.3, Cale choked out. "The adult dose. It worked." Thorne snapped, his mind already racing, not judging. "Okay, get him on the gurney. I need PEDS, EPI Salu med roll, and a full intubation kit now." Then hands stronger than Cale's own gently but firmly prized Leo from his desperate grasp. The gurney was already moving. Cale could only watch his arms suddenly cold and empty as the team raced through a set of wide blue double doors. The doors swung shut behind them, the soft whoosh and solid thud echoing in the now deafening silence of the ambulance bay. He was alone. Stumbling back, his legs felt like water. Then he heard his name. "Cale, what the hell happened?" He turned. His backup had arrived, patrol lights flashing silently. Officer Chen was there with a rookie named Miller. Chen, a 15-year veteran, was a man whose face was a permanent mask of mild boredom. He never got rattled, but his eyes were wide now. Cale's own mind began to reboot. A new kind of panic pierced through him. Odin? Without a single word, he just pointed to the gaping passenger door of his cruiser. Chen peered inside. Cale watched the life drain from his partner's face. The seizing had stopped. Odin was just limp. His swollen blue tongue hung lifelessly over the edge of the seat. "Oh God," Chen breathed, not waiting for a command. "Miller, get in the driver's seat of this cruiser, Arvada Hills Vet Hospital on Evkin. You call them, tell them a K9 is in anaphylactic shock, and you do not stop for a single red light. Go now." The two officers then struggled to move the massive, unresponsive dog from the vehicle. Kyle could only watch frozen as his second partner, his very best friend, was loaded into another car and raced away, its siren wailing into the opposite direction. Then Officer Brenda's voice sliced through the fog in his mind. He hadn't even registered her approach. "You can't stand here. You need to be in the waiting room. As for the boy, they're working on him now. You're in the way. Go." She pointed. The waiting room was its own special kind of hell, with its faded blue chairs, a television muted on a mindless game show, and the thick, suffocating stench of bleach floor wax and stale coffee. Cale collapsed into the nearest plastic chair. And just like that, the adrenaline vanished, as if a switch had been flipped. His body, no longer propped up by raw panic, began to betray him. A violent, uncontrollable tremor began in his hands, then quickly consumed his entire body. He glanced down at his arms and saw they were covered in angry red welts. He hadn't even felt them. 4, 5, maybe 6 stings across his hands and neck. The pain, once just a dull hum in the background, now erupted into a screaming, fiery agony. He squeezed his eyes shut, but the smell of bleach and the low hum of the lights were inescapable. This wasn't Arvada General. This was St. Anonis. 3 years ago, a shaken baby call. A 2-year-old little girl named Maya. He had driven the ambulance himself that time too. He'd waited in a chair just like this one, his hands shaking while they fought to save her. He'd prayed, begged, and tried to bargain with a God he wasn't even sure he believed in. The doors had finally opened, but the doctor wasn't rushing. He was walking slowly. He had that look, the one that said, "We did everything we could." Kyle's eyes snapped open, the sterile waiting room blurring around him. "Not again," he whispered, the words catching in his throat. Please, God. Not again. I can't do this again. Officer Riley. He flinched at his name. A different nurse was standing before him, younger than Brenda, in her late 20s, with a tired but kind olive-skinned face and a long black ponytail pulled back so tightly it looked painful. This was Nurse Reyes, a night shift trauma nurse just coming off a double. She held a clipboard, but her eyes were fixed solely on him. "How is he?" Cale asked, his voice a dry rasp. "Is he—" "They're working on him," she said gently. "He's in critical condition. They're intubating him as we speak." Cale's head sank. Intubation. It was that bad. He hadn't saved the boy. He'd only delayed the inevitable. "But I'm not here about him," Officer Nurse Reyes continued. "I'm here about you. Brenda at the front desk said you were stung." Cale waved a dismissive hand, a gesture that sent a sharp jolt of pain up his arm. "I'm fine. Just a few. I'm not allergic. Just take care of the kid." Nurse Reyes's kind eyes hardened to steel. She took a step closer, her voice dropping low. "Officer Riley," she said, and her tone left no room for argument. "Your hands are shaking so violently you can't keep them still. Your face is beet red. From here I can count at least 3 stings on your neck. I'm a trauma nurse, and I have seen men with no allergies drop dead 2 hours later from a delayed biphasic reaction. You did your part. You got him here. You are not a superhero, you're a patient. I'm not leaving this room." Cale whispered, his voice shattered by the ghost of Maya's memory. "I have to be right here when they come out." I know Reyes said, her voice softening almost imperceptibly. She understood that kind of pain. "I'm not asking you to leave. I am telling you to sit back." She unhooked a rolling IV pole from the hall. "I'm bringing the cart to you, but you're getting a saline lock, 50 milligrams of Benadryl, and a gram of Solumedrol. That is not a request, officer. That is my order." Cale stared at her, ready to argue, ready to refuse, but he saw no malice in her eyes, only a deep, exhausted competence. He was just too tired to fight. He had failed Maya 3 years ago. He was failing Leo now. He was failing Odin. He just sagged in his chair, defeated. "Okay," he breathed, turning his swollen arm over palm to the ceiling. "Okay." The Benadryl Nurse Reyes pushed into his vein hit Cale like a tidal wave, but the adrenaline still screaming through his system refused to let him sleep. The combination was a unique and agonizing hell. He was suspended in a state of hyper-aware exhaustion, his body leaden, his mind a frantic storm. He sat in a hard plastic chair in the waiting room, a saline lock taped to the back of his swollen hand for 3 long hours. The hospital breathed its rhythmic hum around him. A new shift of nurses quietly took the place of the old. Nurse Reyes gave him a small, tired salute before she vanished, her orders fulfilled. The sun was sinking low, painting long, bleeding orange shadows across the sterile hospital floors, a beautiful, cruel reminder that this nightmare had begun on a perfectly normal afternoon. His radio silent on the chair beside him, cracked with intermittent static. He didn't hear it. He was off the grid, his entire world narrowed to a single focus, the blue double doors. He had called Chen. The news from the veterinary hospital was cautious, guarded. Odin was alive, but his condition was critical. The venom had savaged his system. They were fighting severe shock and potential kidney failure. He was just like Leo in a fight for his very life. Cale felt himself being ripped apart. A father forced to choose which dying child's bedside to keep vigil at. Officer Riley. A new voice, rough as gravel, shattered his reverie. He forced his head up. Before him stood a man who looked like he'd been living in his clothes for a decade. He was short and rumpled, with a coffee-stained tie and a cheap blazer straining over his paunch. His face was a messy roadmap of broken capillaries. This was Detective Al Pike. Homicide. Pike was a true cop's cop, a man fueled by stale cigarettes, cynicism, and an almost supernatural ability to smell a lie. Cale knew his reputation. Pike wasn't called for animal complaints. He was called for bodies. Detective Cale managed to say, his voice thick and clumsy from the drugs. How'd you draw the short straw on this one, Pike grunted, pulling a small, grease-smudged notebook from his pocket. Attempted murder of a minor, child torture, aggravated assault. Take your pick. The DA's going to throw the entire law library at this woman. Patrol picked her up. She was still cuffed to the pole when they rolled up, complaining that her wrists hurt. A bitter, cold satisfaction bloomed in Cale's chest. What's her status? Morgan Temple Scott, 38. No priors, married to some tech CEO. She's downtown, already has her lawyer, but it won't matter. Pike's gaze was like stone. She's silent. It doesn't matter. We're charging her with attempted first-degree murder. She won't see the light of day again. While justice took its course, Cale's entire world was focused on those blue doors. The boy, Leo, Cale breathed. Is there any word? As if in answer, the blue doors parted, and Dr. Thorne emerged the young ER resident. He looked as if he'd aged 5 years. He had pulled off his scrub cap, his dark hair plastered down with sweat. His eyes found Kyle, and he walked over his face, a grim mask of professional exhaustion. Officer Riley, he began, his voice low. Leo, that's his name. Leo Scott. He's stabilized. The intubation was a success. We managed to secure his airway just before the swelling would have sealed it completely. For the moment, he is out of immediate peril. Cale released a ragged breath he hadn't known he was holding. He's okay. He is not okay, Dr. Thorne corrected him, his voice sharp and stripped of all comfort. He's alive. We have counted over 150 stings. He's in a medically induced coma to shield his body while we manage the venom and the swelling. But that's not why I came out. He glanced at Detective Pike, then back to Kyle. We ran a full workup. In addition to the stings, we found other things. He's severely malnourished. We found a pattern of old bruising across his back and upper arms, numerous contusions in various stages of healing. Pike swore under his breath, writing furiously in his notebook. Kyle just felt a wave of sickness. He hadn't just saved a boy from an attack. He'd walked into a long-running nightmare. The woman Morgan, Cale said, the connection forming. She's his stepmother? Figures, Pike muttered. We've been trying to reach the father for hours. His assistant kept running interference for us. He's on a flight back from Singapore. As if on cue, a whirlwind of chaos erupted in the ER. A man, impeccably dressed in a $2,000 suit, his face pale and shattered, burst through the sliding doors. This was David Scott. He had the sharp, intense presence of a man who commanded boardrooms. But right now, he was just a terrified father. His expensive silver blonde hair was disheveled, his tie yanked loose. He was flanked by a hospital administrator struggling to keep pace. Where is he? Where is my son? David demanded, his voice a hoarse, raw bark. Mr. Scott, doctor, Thorne said, stepping forward. I'm Dr. Thorne. Your son is in the pediatric ICU. He's in a coma, but he is stable. A coma. David's world seemed to shatter. He staggered, leaning against the wall for support. But how the call? They just said an accident. They said bees. His eyes scanned the room desperate, and they landed on Kyle, the only other person in uniform. You, he said, pushing himself from the wall. You're the officer who found him. Kyle stood up, the Benadryl making him feel like he was moving through water. Yes, sir, Officer Cale Riley. David grabbed the front of Cale's uniform shirt, his eyes wild with grief and fury. What happened? You tell me what happened. How could this possibly happen? Mr. Scott, calm down, Dr. Thorne started. But Detective Pike stepped between them. Mr. Scott, I'm Detective Pike. We need to talk to you, but first there's something you need to see. Officer Riley, he said, turning to Kyle. Your body cam. I need the footage for the report. Cale's hand moved to his vest, which was still resting on the chair. The small black and green Axon camera was still blinking its buffering light, pulsing. He'd forgotten it was even recording. We have to watch it, Pike said, nodding toward a private consultation room off the main lobby. You, me, and him, he said, jabbing a thumb at David. He has to see the truth he's been living with. The consultation room was small gray and held the faint scent of old sorrows. Pike connected Cale's camera to a small tablet. "It's uploading," Pike announced. "It'll stream as it loads." He placed the tablet on the table. Cale, David, and Pike gathered around it, a somber trio. The screen came to life. The first image was the interior of Cale's car. Then the crunch of his own boots on gravel, the squeak of the gate, and then the backyard. The footage was raw, a visceral nightmare. The buzzing was so intense it overloaded the tablet's tiny speakers, a furious digital scream. David Scott made a small, strangled noise in his throat. The camera panned, showing Cale's perspective, revealing the small, red-shirted boy tied to the pole, convulsing. "Oh my God, Leo." "No!" David whispered, his hands flying up to cover his own mouth. And then the camera found Morgan. It captured her, turning her voice chillingly clear through the mask. "This is a private family matter. He is being disciplined. He stole a cookie." David Scott forgot how to breathe. He stared, his eyes stretched wide with a horror that defied all reason. The footage continued a shaky, desperate dance of chaos and motion. It caught Cale's desperate shout, his impossible decision. Then it caught the unlikeliest of heroes. The lens saw Odin, Cale's partner, flinging himself forward not at the monster, but at her victim. It recorded the dog's sharp, piercing cry of agony as he shielded the child. "The dog!" David choked out. "The dog is saving him!" The video showed Cale sprinting for the hose, the gushing water, and the violent, chaotic conclusion to the standoff. Pike pressed pause. The room fell silent but for one single, soul-crushing sound, the sound of a father's world shattering. David Scott stared at the frozen image of his son, sheltered by a hero dog saved by a total stranger. He thought of his important meetings in Singapore. He thought of all the birthdays he had missed. He thought of the countless times he let Morgan handle everything, convincing himself she was just better at it. He looked at Cale, his gaze no longer filled with anger, but with a hollow, deadened emptiness. He didn't see a cop anymore. He saw the man who was there when he wasn't. He saw the man whose dog had shown more fatherly courage than he ever had. The fortress of his denial, his self-importance, his driving ambition, it all crumbled into dust. He didn't fall into a chair. He collapsed to his knees, his expensive suit pooling around him on the linoleum floor. He didn't grab Cale in rage this time. He grabbed his arm, his hand, the one with the IV tape, his grip the desperate clutch of a drowning man. "I'm so sorry," David Scott sobbed, his voice a torn, ragged sound that echoed in the claustrophobic room. Oh God, I'm sorry. I wasn't there. Please forgive me." Cale just stood there, the crushing weight of the father's awful, complete confession bearing down on him. A weight far heavier than any bulletproof vest. Time inside a hospital isn't really time. It's a thick, syrupy unending now. It has no days and no nights, only the murmur of changing shifts and the ceaseless hum of fluorescent lights. Cale's shift had officially ended 16 hours ago. Yet here he was, in the small beige waiting area of the pediatric ICU. The saline lock was still taped to his hand, an unwelcome adornment. The Benadryl's effects had faded, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and the steady throbbing of stings on his neck. He was by any and every measure unfit for duty, but he couldn't bring himself to leave. Across from him, slumped in an identical chair, was David Scott. The CEO who ruled global markets from Singapore was gone. All that remained was a father stripped of everything else, utterly hollowed out, wearing the same $2,000 suit, now a wrinkled ruin stained by vending machine coffee. Words had failed them since David's collapse in the consultation room. But words were no longer necessary. A silent, somber brotherhood had been forged between them under the sterile lights. It was a fraternity born of failure, a bond sealed by the agonizing truth that a child faced death alone, and they had not been there to stop it. Kyle, who had failed Maya, and David, who had failed Leo, When a nurse softly urged David home to shower, he only shook his head, his gaze locked on the doors to the PICU. When Kyle's phone vibrated with an angry text from his landlord about rent, he simply silenced it. The outside world had ceased to exist. All that remained was the agonizing wait. Kyle's phone buzzed once more. This time he glanced down. It was Officer Chen. Kyle rose his joints, crying out in protest, and walked to the window, turning his back to David. "Riley," he answered, his voice a gravelly whisper. "Kyle, hey, just got off with the Arvada Hills vet." Chen's voice was a welcome anchor to reality. "He's stable." Kyle squeezed his eyes shut, his hand clenching the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Stable how, is he?" "Well, he's swollen up like a damn balloon." The vet said it's the worst case of envenomation he has ever witnessed in a K9, but his kidneys are holding strong. Vitals are steady. They have him on one hell of a cocktail, but he is a fighter. He's going to make it. Kyle leaned his forehead against the window's cool glass. A single sharp breath fogged the pain. "Thank you, Chen. Thank you." He ended the call and just stood there, letting the first glimmer of hope in 24 hours wash over him. His partner was alive. His friend was alive. He turned ready to sink back into his chair and nearly ran into a solid, immovable force. Captain Alvarez, standing right there, a statue of authority, his stocky fire hydrant frame radiating impatience and command. He wore a crisp, starched white uniform shirt, his thick gray mustache bristling. Kyle instantly snapped to attention, his bone-deep exhaustion vaporized by a surge of professional dread. He was here for the report, for the unsanctioned transport, for his broken K9 partner. "Sir," Kyle began, his voice immediately formal. I was about to call it in." Alvarez raised a thick hand, cutting him off. He didn't even look at Kyle. His hard, dark eyes were fixed on the PICU doors as if boring through the very steel. "Status from the vet hospital." Alvarez grunted the words a demand. "Yes, sir. Officer Chen just called. Odin is stable." Alvarez grunted again. "Heard he's blown up like a damn tick." "Yes, sir." A long, heavy silence hung in the air between them, broken only by the distant, rhythmic beeping of a monitor. Kyle's entire career flashed before his eyes. The official reprimand, the suspension, the loss of Odin. That quirk of his, Riley. Alvarez said, his voice low, his gaze still fixed on the door. The empathy thing. The reason he washed out of his eval. Kyle's stomach plummeted. "Sir, about that. It did what no policy could cover." Alvarez cut him short, turning to face him at last. His hard eyes, the kind that saw the entire world in black and white, of compliance and non-compliance, were unreadable for once. It did what no man could have. It saw a victim, not a threat. It absorbed the agony. It shielded the boy. It did precisely what you could never train a dog to do. Kyle was frozen in disbelief, utterly unable to speak. Alvarez closed the distance, his voice dropping so only Kyle could hear. "That broken dog of yours, officer, that quirky compassion of his, it's what saved that kid's life. The body cam footage leaves no doubt." He clapped a heavy, uncharacteristic hand on Kyle's shoulder, a gesture so foreign from the captain it almost knocked him off his feet. "Maybe we need more broken cops like that on this force. Human and canine. Good work, Riley. Go on home. Your partner is safe." Alvarez then turned and walked away, his heavy boots echoing down the hall, leaving Kyle standing in a state of profound shock. He had barely processed this victory when the blue pediatric ICU doors swung open. A new nurse emerged, this one with the quiet, confident air of a specialist, her hair secured in a neat bun, and she looked directly across the waiting room. "Mr. Scott David was on his feet in an instant, his chair clattering backward. Kyle rose right behind him. "What, is he okay?" "Did something change?" David's voice was a desperate, cracking plea. The nurse offered a small smile, the first genuine one Kyle had seen in this entire building. "We've been reducing his sedation. He's stirring. He is waking up." David let out a strangled sob and lunged for the door. The nurse gently held up a hand. He's going to be very confused. Kyle started to hang back, feeling this was no longer his place. But David turned his eyes red-rimmed and pleading. "Please," he mouthed. "You too." Kyle nodded, his heart hammering in his chest, and followed him in. The room was dark, save for the blue and green glow of a dozen machines. Leo seemed impossibly small in the center of the railed bed, his face still terribly swollen, but he was no longer the grotesque caricature from the backyard. He was just a little boy again. David rushed to his side. Leo, it's Daddy. I'm here, son. I'm right here." Leo's eyes, mere puffy slits, flickered open. They darted around the room, filled with a drugged, hazy terror. He saw the machines. He saw the tubes. And then he saw his father, and he flinched. He pulled his small hand away from David's touch, his small body pressing back into the pillow, his eyes wide with a fear that shattered David's composure. No, Leo, it's okay. It's Daddy. You're safe. She's gone. She's gone, son. She can't hurt you." David was rambling, desperate to soothe him, but his very presence, the presence of the man who was supposed to protect him and hadn't, was too much. Leo's lips parted, his throat raw. A tiny, dry whisper came out. David leaned in, his own tears dripping onto the sterile blanket. "What, son? What is it? Do you want water? A nurse, I'm right here." Leo whispered again, more insistent, his eyes looking not at his father, but past him toward the door, where Kyle stood in his dark blue uniform. David's shoulders began to shake with deep, silent, racking sobs. He didn't turn around, but his voice, when it finally came, was a broken, astonished thing. "He's not asking for me." Kyle, standing by the door, felt his own throat tighten. What did he say?" David Scott finally turned. His face, the face of a CEO who had lost everything and found it all in the same 24 hours, was completely undone. His eyes met Kyle's, and he gave a wet, gasping laugh of pure, agonizing disbelief. "He asked?" David choked on the words. "He asked, is the dog? Is the police dog, is he okay?" 4 weeks felt like a lifetime. The sweltering, wasp-heavy oppression of that Tuesday had finally shattered, giving way to the gentle, healing warmth of a late Colorado summer. The very sun that just a month before had seemed so heartless and cruel now felt like a soothing balm upon the soul. Kyle had not returned to Juniper Circle. There was no reason to. The house at 1422 had become a notorious landmark, a scar on the face of the bright, affluent suburb. Now it stood empty. David Scott, in a stunning decision that sent shockwaves through his corporate board, had liquidated nearly half of his entire portfolio, selling that cold, modern house of glass and stone for a staggering loss in a single cash transaction, and had simply disappeared from public life. But Morgan Temple Scott had not disappeared. Her fate was sealed with a swift, merciless finality. Kyle's body cam footage, paired with Dr. Thorne's damning report on Leo's history of documented neglect and abuse, rendered a trial completely unnecessary. Confronted with the undeniable video evidence of her monstrous acts and attempted murder, her attorney accepted the only deal on the table, a guilty plea for 28 years in a state correctional facility, with no possibility of parole. Just as Detective Pike had vowed she would never see the light of day as a free woman again, Kyle hadn't set foot inside Captain Alvarez's office since their brief, strange exchange at the hospital. He didn't have to. Odin, the dog who was once broken, once a liability, was now the most celebrated police officer in all of Arvada. The story of the K9 who shielded a child with his own body, absorbing over 100 stings, had swept the nation. The once quirky K9 was now Odin the hero. The department, recognizing the wave of positive press, embraced the narrative. Odin's failed evaluation was quietly, permanently erased from his record. In its place, Captain Alvarez himself had dictated a formal commendation for non-standard tactical compassion, a phrase that quickly became a legendary joke in the locker room. For Kyle, the The crushing pressure had vanished, replaced by an unexpected new proposal. Alvarez wanted Kyle and Odin to spearhead a new community outreach program, one dedicated to forging a bond of trust between K9 units and children. Their mission, it appeared, was no longer about capture. It was about healing, and Odin himself was on the long road to recovery. He had endured 8 days in the veterinary hospital, his kidneys on the brink of failure, his body swollen and trembling. But as Chen had insisted, he was a fighter. He was finally back home with Kyle, his thick coat slowly returning where they had shaved it for the IVs. He now moved with a faint, almost unnoticeable limp in his right hind leg, a permanent, silent testament to the venom's neurological assault. Kyle had been placed on 2 weeks of mandatory leave for his own recovery, time he spent almost entirely on his couch, just watching his partner sleep. The two of them healing from a battle that no training could ever prepare them for. Today marked their first day back on light duty, and their very first assignment was unofficial. Kyle guided the K9 cruiser to a stop before a small, modest rental house in an older part of town. It was a simple brick ranch from the 1950s, the kind of place with a small, lovingly overgrown yard. This was the address David Scott had given him. Kyle cut the engine, and the world fell silent. He glanced at his partner in the passenger seat. Odin, who now rode shotgun by special permission, looked back, his sharp ears pricked forward, his tail offering a slow, curious thump-thump against the seat. "You ready, boy?" Kyle whispered. Odin simply sneezed, sending a fine spray across the dashboard, and Kyle chose to take that as a yes. He stepped out and opened Odin's door. The dog leaped down, his limp visible, but doing nothing to diminish his spirit. Kale approached the chain-link gate, the faint sound of voices drifting from the backyard. He pushed it open and made his way around the side of the house. The small backyard was canopied by a massive ancient maple tree, where a simple plastic picnic table was set on the grass. David Scott was at a small grill, fumbling with a pair of tongs, a bright streak of ketchup staining his now very casual t-shirt. He still looked thin and tired, but the hollow, dead-eyed grief that Kale remembered from the hospital waiting room was gone. He looked truly present. He saw Kale, and a genuine smile broke across his face. "Kale Odin, you came." "We came," Kale replied, feeling his uniform was suddenly too formal for this small, quiet yard. How is he?" David just nodded his head toward the base of the maple tree. Leo sat in the grass, his back to them, playing with a set of red and blue trucks. He was still a small, thin boy, but Kale could see the new, healthy skin on the back of his neck. The physical wounds had mostly faded, leaving pale, silvery lines that would always be a part of him. The psychological ones, Kale knew, ran much deeper. "He's in therapy," David said quietly, his voice full of a new, soft humility. "We both are. He has nightmares. He's so quiet. He doesn't like loud noises or bugs." David looked down at the spatula in his hand as if he'd never seen it before. I feel like I'm really here for the first time. I'm just here." "Leo?" David called out, his voice gentle. "Look who's here." Leo froze completely. He didn't turn. His small shoulders tensed up. Kale's heart plummeted. Perhaps this was a terrible mistake. Maybe the uniform, the dog, it was all too much. "It's okay, Leo," Kale said softly, his voice gentle. "We can go." "No," David said, his eyes fixed on his son. "Wait." Leo turned very, very slowly. He looked at Kyle, his eyes full of caution. He looked at the big black and tan dog standing beside him. He just stared. Odin, no longer a police K9, but just a dog, sat down, his tail sweeping across the grass. He let out a low, soft whine. It wasn't the sound of panic from Juniper Circle. It was a sound of gentle inquiry, a quiet question. Leo's face, still holding the shadows of his trauma, was unreadable. Then Kale saw his small hand unclench. Leo pushed himself to his feet. He looked at Kale. He looked at David. Then his eyes locked only on Odin, and he ran. It was not a walk. It was not a hesitant shuffle. It was a full-on 7-year-old sprint. David took a step forward. Leo gently, but Cale put a steadying hand on his arm. Let him. Leo hit the dog with the full force of his small body. He didn't just hug him, he climbed him, wrapping his arms around Odin's massive neck, burying his face in the dog's thick ruff. Odin, knocked off balance, happily collapsed onto his side, his tail thumping the earth, his body absorbing the impact. Leo just held on, his small body shaking with silent, racking sobs, his fingers twisting into the fur of the animal that had shielded him. Cale felt his throat tighten, that old familiar knot of emotion. But this time it wasn't born of grief. Odin, true to his spirit, true to his magnificent, resilient soul, did not panic. He did not pull away. He simply began to do his work. He turned his massive head, and with a gentleness that seemed impossible for such a powerful animal, he began to lick. He licked the tears from Leo's face, and then he carefully lowered his head. His soft, wet nose found the silvery healed scar tissue on the boy's small forearm, and he licked that too. A quiet, compassionate act of pure healing. Cale looked over at David, who was weeping openly, not in sorrow, but in a kind of profound, beautiful release. A profound relief washed over him. David met Kyle's eyes and he smiled. Kyle found himself smiling back. 3 years ago, he stood frozen in a hospital as a doctor told him Mia was gone. He had stood over her small grave, feeling a part of his own soul die with her. That specter had haunted his every waking moment, a chilling reminder of his failure. But in this moment, witnessing this miracle, a boy who had been saved, a father who was restored, a dog who had fulfilled his destiny, Kyle felt the specter of Mia loosen its grasp. He felt the frozen part of his soul finally begin to warm. He had failed her, a burden he would forever bear. But he had not failed Leo, and he had not failed Odin. His gaze fell upon his partner, his unlikely hero, now rolling over to demand belly rubs from a laughing, tear-streaked child. Kyle understood that his purpose and Odin's had transformed. Captain Alvarez was right. Perhaps their duty wasn't always about retribution. Perhaps sometimes it was about standing guard. And maybe, just maybe, it was about mending what was broken. What can we learn from this story? We search for grand miracles, yet sometimes a miracle is an imperfection God placed there with divine intent. Odin was seen as flawed for being too gentle-hearted. But when true darkness emerged, that supposed flaw was no weakness. It was a shield forged by heaven, the only thing that could have saved Leo. God never makes mistakes. This means your own perceived flaws, your tender heart, your gentle nature. The pain you carry are not mistakes. They are your sacred qualifications given to you to perceive the pain that others cannot. Heroes are not flawless. They are often broken people who simply make the choice to show up. If the journey of Kyle, Odin, and Leo moved your heart, please share this story. You never know who needs to hear their supposed weakness is truly their divine strength. We invite you to subscribe to our community. If you believe God transforms our deepest wounds into our most profound strengths, please write Amen in the comments below. May God bless you and keep you safe. We will see you in the next one.